Okay, so there is this new documentary on Apple TV, right? It is called Steve Martin, a documentary in two parts, right? And, as it says on the tin, it's a documentary about Steve Martin in two parts. It's directed by Morgan Neville. It is produced by Charles Holmes, Morgan Neville, and Megan Walsh. It is executive produced by Katrin Rogers, right? Emily Osborne and Ben Kotner. It is co-produced by Katie Ladine and Chris Shellon, with post-production from Will Maverinkoulos, and archival production from Jane Kelly Kozik. Daniel Wall handles the music of part one. Cinematography for part one. We have Brian Donnell, Brandon Smahada, Emily Topper, Graham Wilbury. Edited by Alan Lowe, Jeff Malmberg, and Aaron L. Nar. Leslie Wolfe took care of the casting. And the people we hear from and sometimes see in part one. So we got Jerry Seinfeld. We have John McEwen. There is who else? Michael Ellis, Mitzi Trumbo, Mason Williams, Barry Edelstein, Harry Bliss, Stormy Shrek, I think Maple Byrne. Right, so the gist is this: Steve Martin is one of the most beloved and enigmatic figures in entertainment. Steve Martin, a documentary in two pieces, dives into his extraordinary story from two distinct points of view, with companion documentaries that feature never before seen footage and raw insights into Martin's personal and professional trials and triumphs. So, part one is Then, which chronicles Martin's early struggles and meteoric rise to revolutionize stand up before walking away at 35. So, yeah, this is really interesting, right? Like, I think when you listen to so many comedy things and things on film, you hear stuff about Steve Martin, but I do not recall like a really frank conversation with Martin, going into his life and stand up and all of those kind of things. So it wasn't until I started I realized that I was like, actually, I don't really know a lot from his mouth, as it were, you know? So it's interesting seeing that rise because you see him at the pinnacle, right? You hear people talking about him at the pinnacle, but to get there, you always have to climb, right? You never start off at the pinnacle, right? So we see that early struggle, right? We find out as a kid, he just wanted to be famous. And then he wanted to be a magician, right? That was the first thing. He wanted to be a magician, right? Which you're just thinking, okay, right? And then it's that realization that maybe he can't go as far as a magician as he could with comedy. So there's that transition. But you're hearing about all the things that played into some of the decisions that he makes, right? He gets a job at working at Disneyland, all the friends that he makes and the things that he sees, right? How like him and his friend worked out patter when they're working in the magic shop there, right? And it's just stuff that you and this is one thing you hear from back in the day, that there's jokes that kind of get passed around. People kind of copy bits and pieces of other people, you know what I mean? That's how you did it, and you built a set, and then that was it. You perform that. There's not You're not writing new material constantly, right? Which people do now, right? If a comedian just went out and did the same act over and over, people would be pissed. Now, obviously, right? You have the ones where people want to hear that famous, you know, routine, that famous sketch. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, do the, what I mean, do the machine, do yeah, just those things, right?" But to do that complete, nah, people ain't wouldn't be feeling that. But that, in this time, that's what people wanted. And you see how he kind of viewed his act, viewed the success, viewed what he was doing. Because we see like journal entries, and there's photos and these archival footage from back in the day. So we see sometimes we see something, and then we have like Steve talking over it, or he's someone, one of his friends, someone that knows him. And so we get this like insight, right? That, yeah, he performed in front of this crowd and it went really well, but he sees an empty seat and that bugged him, right? Or it was a transition where he decides just a headline, right? Like it's not working the way he's doing it. And we get these epiphanies that he comes across, which are just like, yo, how did it take that long? Right? There's a whole thing about crowds, which you just think, huh, I kind of feel you would just figure that out. But it took ages to figure it out. But do we just figure it out because you've heard it so many times from other comics, right? So this was, so early. So comedy was so new, right? Technically, in the form in which we know it now. So, like that big success, all of that, it was different. So this it goes into all of that. There is a funny man. So a girl that he liked and he kind of hung with back in the day, Stormy Shrek. Right. So he's talking about Stormy, and I think now she's an author, and she was very much into the church back then. I think they met at camp. And he was just like, "Oh yeah, I knew her before. She she was so, what I mean, devoted to the God, to Christ." And you're just like, "Yo, Steve." That made me chuckle. That made me chuckle. But yeah, this was just the insights that you get, right? The way he talked about, TV and film, right? The different reactions you got when you said what kind of job you did and those kind of things, that relationship with the family, all of these things like are revealed to you. And it's really, really interesting. It's just over an hour and a half, right? Just over an hour and a half for part one. But yeah, if you like comedy, if you like Steve Martin, I highly recommend checking it out, people. I really do, man. So yeah, Steve Martin, a documentary in two parts. Part one, then.